How do you sort out the so-called jargon from real-world practices that work? Do the members of your organization find some business or technology advice utterly confusing? Welcome to Real Talk with Sam Holcman. In this program, we set the record straight, and in terms that business people and technology people can understand. Now, here is your host, Sam Holcman.
Welcome to this edition of Real Talk. I'm Sam Holcman. Thanks for joining me for this particular episode. This episode is titled, An Architecture Model No One Uses is Just Cosmetology. Architecture models, whether they're enterprise, business, capabilities, can really look impressive with today's tools. I mean, they can really look fancy, but they are only of use if stakeholders in the business and stakeholders in the technology actually use them to enable their business strategy, fully traceable and transparent from the models through execution. You can create the most comprehensive model in the world using the fanciest tools that you can buy. But if stakeholders do not find it of value, it remains in the architectures and the architect's hands, and, as the phrase goes from the olden days, becomes a very, very nice shelfware. So real models that are useful for the stakeholders enable business strategy, are human consumable, and there are many dimensions that you as architects need to recognize about the ability of human beings to comprehend, analyze, and use these models, which are not part of most courses that are out there. And we also have to recognize the various stakeholder roles and responsibilities. In other words, there isn't one model for everything that's out there. These models are, first, tools for the business, and a second complementary set of models are tools for architects and implementation specialists. Yes, there are two sets of models. It's just like in the physical world, there's engineering models and manufacturing models. They're different. They all represent the same, quote, end thing, but they're different. Yes, there are two types of models, not one. So the purpose and principle of models, number one, is there need to be business driven. Some people co-create these business models. For example, what we do is we put out what we refer to as 0.7 of a particular model, give that to the stakeholders to add, modify, change, enhance, etc., etc. Not a blank board, but actually something that they can munch on. They're actionable. They should inform decision-making, investments and priorities or operations, whatever domain that you're looking at. And, of course, the concept of alignment. We've been talking about alignment since I think the first day technology did something. And models should clarify and simplify. The objective of models is not to add complexity. It's to make it easier to understand something that's complex. Please remember that. Business-friendly language, what we call human consumable, and practical understanding and structures. The models are modular for the various stakeholders. They don't have to see, quote, the whole thing. And they're based on ontological principles, not hierarchies or flows or maps or all those types of things that sometimes people do. Once again, fancy schmancy tools are not what we start with. We start with what people need to understand. The models are, quote, owned by the business, not by the architects or the technologists. Architects and technologists are sort of like holders of those models. They are custodians of the models, but they don't own them. We don't own, as technologists or architects, the models. They're the business models. And they need to be traceable from strategy to execution. And people should be able to see the 5 transformations from the business through enabling technology. They should be visible to everybody. There needs to be governance. That phrase, of course, is out there all the time. In other words, there has to be the ability to understand who can modify things, who can look at things, who can add things, who can delete things, and those types of things. They are the DNA of the organization. They are the crown jewels of the organization that are there. They need to understand, review, and possible improvements will occur over time. If the business doesn't change, you don't need models. Let me repeat. If the business doesn't change, you don't need models. The purpose of models is to be ahead of the change. Architecture models lead change. Documentation occurs after the change is made. Don't get those terms mixed up. Okay? Real architecture models lead change. Documentation occurs after the change is made. They are different. Okay? What we have to also understand is there's various interests that can be addressed. Once again, there isn't one model. There can be transformation models. There can be investment models. There can be strategic planning models. So in summary, any architecture model is only as valuable as its adoption and use. Adoption and use. Business people, stakeholders, those are the ones that are making decisions whether or not something is useful. Regularly updating models to make sure they guide real decision-making and investments are the key to architects recognizing the value they're providing to the enterprise. I hope this helps.
Thank you for tuning in to Real Talk. Be sure to join your host, Sam Holcman, again for another edition of our program. We'll have more real topics of discussion then.